So Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and now we turn to this wonderful program for tonight at CBST. And a few words before we start, and I'm going to invite our guests to join us in a minute for a conversation, as I said earlier, with me. And then after services, 15 minutes after services, everybody's welcome back, and we will then have a discussion with the community, and questions can be asked at that point for that time. So on page 5 of your Shabbat program is some information about Standing Together and our two speakers. And I want to say a few words about the organization and the speakers. Standing Together is not a new organization. It started about 8 years ago, and it has arrived at a place post-October 7th that's more essential than ever. And we're going to be discussing that with Sally and Alon-Lee in a moment. So Sally Abed, who is here, was just elected to the City Council of Haifa, which is an amazing, fantastic development. And the movement itself understands that there has to be a range of activities to achieve effective change. One of them is demonstrations, but another is getting people into political office in positions in which they can make those changes happen. And Sally, I'm just so thrilled that you stepped forward into that role. And in Haifa, the city in which you live, you're now on the city council. I've known Sally for years because I listen to a podcast that she does, and everybody knows I'm a podcast junkie. And I strongly recommend this podcast called Groundwork, which is mentioned in our bio, that she does with Dina Kraft from Haaretz, and explores all different issues around Palestinians and Jews who refuse to accept the status quo and work together for change. It's an amazing resource, and Sally just told us earlier that she's working on season 3, so very excited about that, and I urge people to watch that, to listen to it. And Alon-Lee is the national co-director, and Sally and Alon-Lee are both part of the national leadership, but he started as an organizer of the first national waiters union in Israel. And both of them bring tremendous skill, vision, and as you can hear, compassion and strategy to actually making effective change. So I'm going to ask the two of you to join me, and we're going to have a conversation. I think I'm going to take off my talis for this so it doesn't bother us. Doesn't matter, wherever you want to sit. Here we go. Let's start. Jason, would you put up the map? Let's start by a little map orientation. Okay, a little map orientation. If Jason, you could put up the map, it's going to show up on these two screens. All right, this is a map of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and the surrounding countries. And it's really important, and we've done different map orientations before at CBST, but I thought to start our conversation, it would be helpful for people who aren't familiar with the map to understand the map a little bit. So you see Haifa off right on the sea, and that's where Sally lives and is a member of the city council. And north and west. Northeast. Thank you. I can't do that in New York either.
It's the Western Galilee.
It's the Western Galilee.
Misleading. Yeah.
Is where is the village from which Sally comes. So you can see the village up there.
It's practically the only map in the world where Ma'ilya is there with Haifa and Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. A village of like 1,000 people out there in the map. 3,000, I'm sorry.
We'll give this as a souvenir of your trip to CBST. And you go down the coast, you could see Tel Aviv, and that is where Alon-Lee lives, in Tel Aviv. And if you go down the coast from Tel Aviv, you could see Gaza, which is also connects to Egypt, right below it, and the West Bank. And you can see how close everything is. And before we get into the discussion of Standing Together, just to make sure and people have been on trips with me, we do a lot of map orientation, so you understand. Palestinians who live in this region live under several different legal statuses, And so Palestinians who live inside the green line, which it's green because that happened to be the color that when they were dividing up and making the map, they used the color green marker. And so it's inside of what is officially the state of Israel. Palestinians who live inside where it says Israel are citizens of the state of Israel and can vote, go to school, and experience extreme social discrimination, but have more legal rights than Palestinians in the other areas. So Sally is a Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel, so she's in that category. Then Palestinians who live in Gaza are under one set of circumstances, which is different than Palestinians that live in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank. So Palestinians in East Jerusalem, which was pseudo-annexed by Israel after the Six-Day War, have some legal status. They can vote in municipal elections, but they're not citizens of the state. And that's a pretty big issue. And of course, in the West Bank, which is contiguous there and connected to Jerusalem, Palestinians who live in the West Bank are under a military occupation and live under military legal system. The Jews who live in the West Bank live under civil law. So an Arab who lives in a Palestinian village next to a Jewish town has a completely different set of legal rights. Thank you. That was a big word I couldn't think of. Legal rights. And for instance, and then I just want to set this up so people have a little bit of an understanding of the picture, because we have a lot of different... a Palestinian who lives in the West Bank is controlled by military law, and to that it means that if the military wants to arrest somebody, they can do it with a system of laws that are, some of which are from the British Mandate period, where they don't have access to things like due process or a lawyer or right to trial, things like that. So just to get there's much more to say, but just to get a clear picture. All Palestinians are in some ways from the same family, so it's not like they're different people who live in these different places. Inside of Israel, it's 20% of the Israeli population is Palestinian, Muslim and Christian. There are a lot of Christians. And Druze. And because of, obviously, Christianity kind of started there, it's a good place to be Christian, to get to some holy sites. So just to make, not all Palestinians are Muslims, to make some basic things obvious. So Gaza from 48 to 67 was controlled by Egypt, and the West Bank from 48 to 67 was controlled by Jordan. There's a lot more to say, but I just want those kind of basic realities. For Jews who live in the West Bank, they have a different license plate, they have a different whole system of rights, and a whole system of access to civil law, lawyers, trials, things like that. It's amazing. So now I want to start with the two of you. Would you tell us a little bit about the origin story of standing together, and then I'm going to get to a different origin story. But would one of you tell us? Sally?
Thank you so much. Can I have like 2 words just reflecting on this service? Obviously, I'm not Jewish. I actually grew up Christian. Me'alia is one of the 2 remaining Palestinian Christian villages within Israel. Most of them were ethnically cleansed in 48. It reminded me a lot of church, even though I haven't really been to church for a long time. And I was telling, I do identified as agnostic for many years, and I think in recent years, I think I'm an atheist. But today, I told Alon-Lee while reading, I was like, I didn't know we're that religious,
Well, we say at CBST all the time that I always say that I believe in God, but not the God who cares whether you believe in God.
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe in such a petty God.
I felt that.
Yeah.
I felt that. I felt that, and that was beautiful. And it made me very sad, but also, we said shalom so many times, and we said Israel so many times, and shalom in Israel right now. Even saying the word is just like nonsense, right? It's nonsense. It's nonsense to say shalom salam in back home, and in many ways, what coming here as a Palestinian in a Bet Knesset with a Jewish diaspora mostly, and being Palestinian, part of also the Israeli society and what that represents for us, and fighting for that through our grief and our pain right now, and what we are enduring and what we have been enduring as Palestinians for decades. It's a lot. It really is a lot, and I think in many ways it makes me I feel very privileged to be able to navigate what it means for people here when they say Israel, because Israel for me right now is extremely antagonistic. It's paradoxical to fight for society that is rejecting me and that is led by a government that wants my eradication. While it's paradoxical and privileged to be able to navigate that with amazing partners, and for us to be able to reimagine what that means and reimagine what Israel means for the Jewish people. And it's not about, making the nation statehood and the government and the politics what's sacred, but the people and the land. And for me, that people and the same people, the same land that you perceive as Israel, I perceive as Palestine. And that should be okay. And I think that's where we need to get to. A little bit about, sorry, that was a long reflection. A little bit about standing together. We are an 8-year-old grassroots movement, and we work within the Israeli society under the assumption that we need to build a political intention within our society to build a new majority, a new protagonist, right? That imagines the partnership and that challenges the binaries, not just the Jewish-Palestinian binaries, but also other binaries such as secular and religious, Mizrahi and, Ashkenazi, and all of these different binaries that we see within our society, and understand that we have the majority of us, a very, very deep interest in ending the occupation and in peace, and in social and economic equality and social justice and climate justice. The second thing that we also recognize when it comes to peace and building intentional, political intention for peace, is that it needs to come from self-interest, from shared interest. And we have this amazing opportunity, amazing reality, a very difficult, complex reality, where both Jewish and Palestinians actually live together in Israel. And I think that's something that is very hard for people to understand. I met with Rashid Khalidi yesterday. I don't know if any of you know him. He's a Palestinian historian at Columbia University, and he surprised me. And he told me, you Palestinians in Israel, you will lead us. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we are so traumatized, we are so hurt right now. We don't even know, we can't imagine, we don't have the tools, the ability to imagine how to navigate this, how to imagine our lives together. And you guys, you were forced to. And now you're navigating it, and you're leading a new kind of reality. And don't be fooled, we are not, for 75 years, for the first 20 years, we were under military rule as well. My grandparents and my parents lived and were born under military rule within Israel. But for many years, we do experience the conditional, the conditioned existence, democracy and citizenship and discrimination and persecution. Another third, you spoke about the different systems, and we do also experience yet another form of oppression. And what Standing Together is trying to do is understand how we can co-lead this, how we can build this new protagonist where Alon-Lee is not saving me, but he's doing it out of self-interest, and I'm not only demanding liberation and solidarity, but also assuming responsibility over the whole people in our society and in the land. And I think that's what Standing Together is doing by trying to connect the struggles for peace, for equality, and for social justice. I think that's...
So Alon-Lee, would you talk a little bit about October 7th and Standing Together? And maybe even start by saying, what was October 7th like? Maybe both of you say a little bit about October 7th in your lives, and then what it's been like in trying to understand this. And then I'm going to ask some of the questions that are on people's minds. I asked people to send me some questions, so even I'm going to ask a few of them now before we get there. But can you talk a little bit about October 7th?
Yes, sure. I also want to say that it was a very moving service, and it was a very moving thing to be exposed to something that is so close to me as a Jewish person, but actually so far away from what we have back home. And another thing, before telling you the story of how we experienced October 7th, how we experienced the month since, I think it's important to address the reality right now, and to say, in a short but clear way, the reason we're actually here, Jews and Palestinians together, from Standing Together, and it is together support for our demand back home, but also from you guys, from your administration, for a ceasefire agreement right now to stop the killing and the destruction in Gaza and to bring back all the hostages alive to their families. And it needs to happen now. It needs to happen now. It's already too late, but we are afraid like we've never been before, from the places we are falling to. And I think since October 7th, it feels like we're free falling. Whenever we think or feel or guess we hit the rock bottom, it's not that. It's still not the rock bottom. We continue to free fall. There's nothing to grip on. There's nothing to use in the reality to kind of push the stop button or the brakes. And it seems as if we all woke up on October 7th to a nightmare, to sirens, not understanding why it will be sirens right now. Reading that actually there are sirens all across the country, understanding there's some kind of attack, reading the news, calling each other, calling the families, going to our shelters, which most of us don't have, so we go to the staircase, standing there with our neighbors, checking the phones like crazy, seeing the videos coming from the south, from Sderot, of armed Palestinians with, rifles on SUVs, breaking into those towns and kibbutzes in the south. Understanding this is something big, bigger than we thought possible. Understanding that it's developing and developing and developing, and then those headlines started to translate into numbers, and then the numbers started to translate into stories and to names, and we all were in this kind of a nightmare, not understanding whether it's actually real, waking up on October 8th, asking ourselves, what happened yesterday? Is it like we needed a minute to like position ourselves in reality again and to believe? Hearing then Hamas promising to do it again, feeling the fear of our communities, and then meeting with our government, meeting with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and some other ministers, choosing to address the public and not to suggest empathy, not to give us a hug, not to speak about the fact that there were more than 230 hostages, people that were kidnapped from their homes to Gaza. They didn't talk about it. Immediately, they talked about revenge, about flattening Gaza, about a payback, about making them suffer. Immediately. It took them weeks, long weeks to even meet with the families of the hostages. And with this, we understood that what we hear, what we see, is something completely different. Since then, we saw a huge campaign waging on Gaza, a military campaign, bombardments, death toll that is more than 30,000 people that died. Some were more than 12,000 children that were killed by bombardments. 70% of all the homes in Gaza that have been destroyed or impacted. And we hear openly, directly, in the news, our ministers, our parliament members, the leadership, the people that should represent us, saying in the 8 o'clock news, the children in Gaza, none of them is innocent. The children of today are the terrorists of tomorrow. The ones we didn't kill in the war of 2014 are the ones that committed the massacre of 2023. End of quote. And this is a real quote of a minister in Israel. We hear that we should drop an atomic bomb on them. We hear that no one is innocent in Gaza. We hear open calls to expel all Palestinians from Gaza. We see what happens in the West Bank. You know, in the West Bank, who rules? Hamas rules the West Bank? But yet, even before October 7th, it was the deadliest year for Palestinians in the last 20 years in the West Bank. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed there by settlers, but also by the army. And this is the reality that we're facing with day after day after day. And we know what's probably the worst thing for us internally about it. It is that we are promised that this is the only way. That in order to have our safety as Jews, as Israeli citizens, in order for us to have our safety, we need to control, we need to destroy, we need to kill, we need to choose this reality of it's us or them. And this is what we're facing right now, and this is the reason Standing Together decided to quickly organize and to try and do the most basic thing in politics, and it is to create competition. To create a competition and a choice, a different choice, a different path, to point on this different path. A path of solidarity against turning against each other. You know, Ben Gvir, you probably all know this name, he's the minister of our police, the minister of internal security in Israel. And he wasted no time, actually. I think it was less than days when he faced the entire Israeli public, getting the coverage of his lifetime, more than most of the other ministers, promising that the Palestinian citizen of Israel, your neighbors, the one that live in your building or in your town, 20% of our society, the people that work in our hospitals or in our school systems, they are preparing to get a call from Hamas to act against you, to attack you, to do the same thing in your home, in your neighborhood. And he started handing out guns. A plan, an organized action to give tens of thousands of guns that came, by the way, from the US. Just 2 days ago, we celebrated in a very celebrative press conference the 100,000 piece of arms that was distributed to the Israeli public. It doesn't come to the Palestinians. It doesn't come to the leftists. It comes to right-wing organized groups. So we understand that this path that we're trying to point at, to lead, to organize our society around, is a path of solidarity instead of turning against each other, and it's a path of peace, Israeli-Palestinian peace, instead of moving from one war to the other, between the wars, deepening the occupation, expanding the settlements. And I'm ending by saying that peace for us is not just, it's not a slogan, it's not a title. For us, peace, it's a very certain, specific reality. And it's a reality where all people are equal, free, and independent. And that's what we work for.
So one of the things that has ripped apart the United States and honestly the world, but we'll talk about New York and the United States, and I know that both of you have experienced that, both in the trip you took here, was it November or December? November, and then this trip is that it's become so toxic here that you have to choose a side. You either support Palestinians or you support Israeli Jews. There's no concept. It's become you're pro-Israel, which means you're anti-Palestinian, or you're pro-free Palestine and you're anti-Israel. It's become, I know that you both have experienced some of that, and I think one of the things that's so inspiring to those of us who are supporters and feel so deeply connected to you is that you're able to do what we here can't seem to do as well, which is reject the binary. That we're talking about Israeli Jewish people, Palestinian people, both together fighting a fascist government. But here in the United States, we're not, by and large, the lines have become, it's one or the other. It's not, there's no, and can you talk a little bit about that, how you've accomplished that and how that feels, and it's not, and what standing together does in order to achieve that, those solidarity gatherings you have and the various pieces you do? Or just respond to it in any way you want to.
I'll give this the simplest way possible, and then I'll expand, of course. But, we understand that Jewish safety means Palestinian freedom, and the other way around. It's very simple. And it's the assumption that there are 7 million Palestinians on the land, and there are 7 million Jews on the land, and we all have the right to exist peacefully and equally and freely, period. It's very simple. Now, when we talk about, challenging the dichotomy and challenging the binary, and people are like, you're the middle ground. You're like in the middle. No. We're not in the middle. And we're not, choosing the middle ground. Because we need to acknowledge the power differential. We need to acknowledge the hegemony. And you cannot choose a middle when you have an oppressing entity, and you have people that have been enduring unimaginable oppressive violence of occupation, of blockade, of ethnic cleansing, of incarceration and violence for decades. And that's important to understand. With that being said, it's important to also understand that people are not their government. And everyone on the land, we might not pay the same price, but we all will benefit when we are all free and equal. And that's important to understand. And then when you understand that very basic fact, that we all actually have an interest, a deep interest, that we're all equal and free, you understand that we cannot isolate one group of the whole people, but we need to isolate the minority, the very, very small minority right now, back home as well as here, that are benefiting, that are maintaining the status quo. And when we are here, we need to ask ourselves, not to ask about terminology and what you are, and are you eligible to enter the club of pro-Palestine or enter the club of, but understand the very, very deep question of, do you want to change the status quo? And I think when we ask that question, we will see that we are much less divided. And we need to ask ourselves, do we want to stop the killing right now? The killing and the starvation of hundreds of thousands of people displaced under bombardment. We want to save I don't know how many hostages, unfortunately, that are still alive, that are probably also starved and under bombardment. Do we want that? Is that our job? And if the answer is yes, it means we need to be together, and we don't have the privilege to perform our ugly truth, but we have to actually work to change that ugly truth and that reality.
Do you want to respond to that also, Alon-Lee?
I 100% agree.
Okay, there you go. I think it's a really key point because for us here, it has become absolutely impossible to engage across these lines and to say, which we've tried to say here at CBST and has been my position, which is we have to understand this deep connection, and that I refuse to say my being loving the best of what Israel should be is the people of Israel, and that must include the full liberation of Palestinians and Palestine. But I also refuse to then go into a place of saying, therefore, I'm anti-Israel. That the language has become so, I'd have to say, kind of performative here, that if you say these words or in this order, do you say free the hostages first or a negotiated ceasefire agreement first? Or do you say ceasefire without agreement, or do you say a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire? And what the loadedness of it is all about where you're going to find exactly what you described. So I should have just said, I just agree. Sorry. You were right. You were right, Alon-Lee. You were right. So talk a little bit about the work of standing together in this post. Israel is still in trauma. Palestinians are still in trauma. Jews are still in trauma. And the vision and the texture of everything are two deeply traumatized people. And what you guys are doing, nobody else is doing in quite this way. So can you talk a little bit about what you are doing post October 7th, post that day after of October 7th, to
Sure.
build solidarity in a world which says all Palestinians are Hamas, or all Palestinians, as you described, could be a terrorist?
I will start actually with something that we're doing in Israel, but is also relevant, and we are trying to bring this as an offer also to the people abroad. One of our basic, fundaments of our theory of change is this kind of a tale about a rock that is blocking the road. And the people that walk on this road are people that are trying to get to very different villages. They're not from the same place. They don't agree on the same place they want to go to. But the road is blocking all of their ways. And one person that wants to come to this village tries to lift the rock and he can't. And the other, she tries to lift the rock and she can't. But together, if they all put their hands together and trying to lift the rock, they can actually do it. And we're saying that this rock right now is the killing and destruction in Gaza. It is the hostages that are still there waiting to come back to their families, and their families waiting for them to come back home. And it is the terrible, horrific path that all of the people are on, of wars and destruction and killing and no peace. So together, building a coalition back home of convincing people that even if they come from very different backgrounds, we can work together to expand our camp right now back home of agreement that right now this reality needs to stop. This is what we're trying to do. And it means organizing, trying and build power. It means creating moments of solidarity. Since October 7th, we started to really gather as many people as we can in one room or in one open space, in protests or rallies or just gatherings indoors. At the beginning, it wasn't even legal to go outside and demonstrate. The police really prevented us from doing that. So we moved from one locality to the other every third to fifth day, and we're still moving all across the country, in Palestinian ones, in Jewish cities, in mixed cities, and we're just creating a moment of solidarity. One of the most powerful moments at the beginning of all this nightmare was just 8 days after the war started. We had a gathering in Haifa. Every public space we tried to get turned us down. They canceled. The police canceled. So we found ourselves in a mosque that opened their doors to us. And Sally was supposed to give a speech there, but she just went on the stage in front of 700 people, and she cried. And all the room was crying with her. And that's like a week and a bit after it all started. And being able to feel those feelings together, Jews and Palestinians, even though we turn on our Instagrams and we see different stories, right? If I will go as a Jewish person and turn on my TV, I will see Channel 12 and they will tell me the stories of the music festival, of the hostages, the stories of the people that died on October 7th by Hamas. If some Palestinian will turn on their TV, they will see Al Jazeera with their rubbles and destruction and killing and starvation in Gaza. But being able to be in one room, in one space, to be organized in one movement and feel those feelings together, it must mean that we can also move from only these feelings to actually imagine reality together, to ask the tough questions together, to even maybe argue together, but to also act together for the same kind of future that we understand both of us will benefit from. So we gather people, we organize people, we mobilize now in big rallies of thousands of people across the country, and we are trying to point and create this option that is just wasn't in the menu for so long. And you know, people cannot choose an option that is not on the menu. And if all your government, and I'm sorry to say the governments of Israel in the last decades, even when they're called the change government, if all those governments are just suggesting and offering a path of more of the same, a path of more destruction and more disbelief, more oppression, more settlements, more incarcerations, then you are left with no option to choose from. And I think this is our basic role, to be able to be out there, getting that attention, convincing people, organizing them, building power, and looking with all our might on this possibility to not accept the status quo, not to say it's from God, this is in the sky, it's written somewhere, but to actually say that we can choose a different path. And it's either we liberate ourselves and the Palestinians, or we are doomed.
One of the things that you just said, Sally, and you repeated in your way, Alon-Lee, was the power of being able to carry these multiple truths at once and to understand them. At the same time, understanding there is no equality right now. It's not like there are two equal sides. And that's a thing that's very hard for Americans to understand, because when it's portrayed as a war, it's just portrayed as two equal sides, or that's the image of it. But the thing that Jews feel very nervous about, of course, is that this is a repeat of a pattern of Jewish vulnerability. And what's very hard for Jews to also get is that we could possibly be in a position of power as opposed to a position of weakness. And it's very hard for Jews to understand that we could be the 80% and not the 20%, since we were the minority forever in every other place in the universe for the last 2,000 years. And we see here a huge division between people of my generation, I'm in my 60s, and people in the community who are closer to that generation, for whom Israel was seen as a safety for Jews who were otherwise at risk. And even progressive Jews of my generation can understand, okay, there were mistakes made, the Nakba was horrific. The United States was founded on slavery and on genocide. So we'd hear in the...
And it's turning out great.
It's turning out great, right? We're doing great. But look, we do have, there is movement. There is some movement, and that's what we have to celebrate. There's movement. We've gotten away, even if we haven't gotten to where we want to go to. And this ability to kind of look at Israel, it's very hard for a generation who saw Israel as the possible savior of the Jewish people. And then we have a younger generation who's grown up only knowing Bibi Netanyahu as prime minister and Israel only as an extension of American military power. And we have this complete breakdown here of people even spending the time or compassion to have an open enough heart to say, let me understand you. We can't do that here. It's people immediately attack, immediately boycott, immediately put everyone else in a box that should be kept far away from them. And how you've been able to build this coalition, it's a deeper word than coalition. I mean, it's so much deeper. Partnership. It's a partnership to try and imagine and then work for the future in which all peoples are going to live in freedom and in security and in liberation. is something we have no vocabulary for it here and no action. Here it's just, attack, attack, attack. Do you have advice for us?
I love when I am asked that question. I think when people, talk about the state of Israel, and the safety of the state of Israel, you need to remind yourselves that you're talking about the safety of the Jewish people, right? And you know that you are actually more safe here than in Israel as Jewish people. In fact, Jewish people, it's still, I think you can say it unarguably that you are safer here than you are in Israel. And I think in many ways, you talk about Israel being the majority in a Jewish state, and I think the question should be, what kind of state is it, right? Also for Israelis, for Israeli citizens, for Jewish Israeli citizens, what kind of state is it for all of citizens, and what kind of state is it for the people that it's controlling, that are not its citizens? And I think everyone should be understanding that you need to acknowledge the deep conflict between the governments that have led the state of Israel for decades and between the interest of the people of Israel in safety and freedom. And there's a deep conflict between what has been, led, and the kind of politics and the kind of ideology that has led the state of Israel, and how it served its people. And by its people, I don't just mean, yes, the Jewish people, and I guess that's the main interest here, but it shouldn't be. It's the people of the land, and that's my people as well. The other people of the land. And that's my advice. And I think that's why it's easy for us, because we see that conflict, we live it. We know that our government has no interest in our safety, not just as Palestinians, but also as Jewish people. And that conflict should be helping us think about how we can change our society fundamentally, politically, economically, in order for all of us not to only stop dying, but actually prosper as both peoples on the land. And that doesn't start with, the statehood, the idea of statehood. It starts from the people. And then, we will be able to create independence for both peoples in any way that we see equal and free for both.
So before we end this section, I just want to ask both of you to tell us a little bit about your family of origin and where you grew up a little bit, and where you came from as a Jew. I hear it's not Poland. Alon-Lee says that people always tell him to go back to Poland, which is the way of...
Twitter is not a pleasant place at the moment. The amount of times I get called to go back to Poland, where my family is not even from Poland, is becoming funny.
That's what mainly offends you.
That's one of the more offensive parts, yes. But I think that, just before the family, just to add something, I think it's a very smart advice Sally gave people here. Think that if you say you care about Israel, that's great, that's amazing, it's important. But then ask yourself, is this state good for the Israelis? Ask yourself this question. Is it good for us economically? Are we thriving? Are we having the basic needs met? And the answer will be that this country needs to be changed. That the people that are working to change this country needs your support. And that's a good answer to kind of see it.
And I just want to add to this, and then we're going to take a break, finish the service, and come back together for discussion. And this is why I have had so many problems with the BDS movement myself, because what's happened here in this country is that the right wing has poured billions, and I'm not exaggerating, billions of dollars into right-wing efforts inside of Israel. Some of the worst things happening in Israel are entirely American import or exports. Exports from here, imports there.
Also
and
the politics of identity.
And the politics of identity. We have given Israel some of the worst things and financially financed really the right-wing settlements. Many of the settlements on the West Bank are entirely funded by American money. East Jerusalem, entirely funded by American money. Newspapers, media, entirely funded by American money. And then what does the progressive left do here in the United States? Says, let's boycott Israel in order to have an impact on what's going on there. So it means progressive groups like this are starved to death because the left does not adequately support the groups on the ground because it's supporting BDS. I want to say one thing, and again, we have to be if we care about the quality of life and the change that we want to see happen, we have a moral obligation to be supporting those groups, those efforts that are actually actively trying to change. And one of the big differences with South Africa is that it wasn't possible to have a progressive group in South Africa under apartheid. You were either totally killed, incarcerated, or exiled. Israel still has there are still groups like Standing Together, or a couple of weeks ago we had Combatants for Peace here, and I see Gili Getz, who's the chairperson of Combatants for Peace here, the American Friends of. And so how to emphasize how important it is to support the voices and the energy. And by the way, we have some of these programs of Standing Together, and we do have the email, the URL that you can donate for Standing Together. And if you care about the work of Sally and of Alon-Lee and of transforming Israel into a place in which Israeli Jews and Palestinians are all free and secure, we've got to step up as a progressive world. And we can't just say, okay, we're going to sit back and wait to see what happens. So that's just my commercial plug.
I wanted to be blunt and call you all to support us financially also, but the rabbi did the holy work for me. So thank you.
So let's just end this section. Tell us a little bit about the village and your family and 48, and tell us a little bit about your family.
I always feel like I have the responsibility to be as least misunderstood as possible in these rooms. So I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. Okay. But you said the moral.
It's just a guideline. You could reject me. It's okay. A lot of people.
You said we have the moral, and the moral obligation to support. But I think, as a Palestinian, I also feel like we have the moral obligation, all of us, to boycott, oppressive entities and oppressive corporations that are actively engaging in expanding the settlements and in incarcerating Palestinians, in dropping the bombs on Gaza right now. So I think, yes, exactly. And we need to make that distinction. Don't boycott my village, for example, or me. Where I am from, I'm from Maalia. You saw it. I always say it's right next to the Lebanese borders in the Western Galilee, but you saw it. I grew up pretty much in a very depoliticized Palestinian family, like most. One of my very first memories is my grandma shouting at me not to tell the story of the Nakba to my Jewish friend, because we don't tell these stories to Jews, right? I grew up with both of my parents quite accepting and internalizing those conditions, those submissions, But I also grew up, seeing generation by generation, our youth really becoming more connected, becoming more politicized, but at the same time also becoming more, the incitement is increasing. There's like this paradox of us becoming, we're more fluent in Hebrew. We're more educated, we're more assimilated in our society, but at the same time, with the increasingly, escalating government and politics, we're facing more persecution and more racism and more incitement. But I was very privileged to be. I always acknowledge my privilege, by the way, but to be part of a family that did accept those conditions, but was able to climb up the ladder. And in many ways, that really did shape me, because I see a lot of, and we're not like super privileged or anything. I was just like a very normal working class family, but statistically we were better than others. And being Christian in Israel as well, sorry for the non-PC, but you're like a little bit less Arab when you're Christian, a little bit less threatening. Which we endure, we internalize as Christians as well. And you see that you have a deeper level of depoliticization and a much higher level of assimilation and climbing the ladder as Christians, which is a very tiny little minority. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, the more, one of the problems and the inherent problems that we see is the submission, and the stronger you are, the more submitted you are, and the more depoliticized you are as Palestinian, and the more marginalized you are, the more oppressed you are and still silenced. So there's like no space to actually create any kind of politics, to create any kind of co-leadership. And that's one of the things that we're trying to tackle as well within the movement, to how to repoliticize, but legitimize, empower, but also legitimize our kind of politics, not the one that isolates Palestinians from the Israeli society. It's a struggle. It's a challenge, but it's imperative. That wasn't a lot about me. I'm always like take it back into, I'm sorry. I live with my husband in Haifa, and our dog, and his name is Darwish. I live in Wadi Salib, which is in the downtown Haifa, right under Hadar, if you know Hadar, anyone?
And Haifa is a binational city.
Yes. Actually, historically, it's the only mixed city in Israel that was historically mixed. It actually had a historic Jewish quarter. It had a historic labor Jewish Arab union historically in the 20s, 30s, was it? 20s. So it's in the DNA, and yes, in the 20s, right? And it's in the DNA of Haifa, and I think in many ways, I always say it. Our recent elections. Only in Haifa that you will be able to have a slate, a joint slate, one of two, one run in Haifa and one in Tel Aviv Yaffa, that Itamar was also elected through. The only
Itamar here, who is also on the leadership was just elected to the city council of Tel Aviv Yaffa.
Yeah, and we're the only two joint slates that really made it throughout the whole country. And the reason I say this is because, Haifa really is hope to be able to be led by a Palestinian woman for the first time in history, uncompromised, politics, and be able to provide hope to people and provide relevancy to people. You good? Yeah. And to be able to provide relevancy and hope to people during these dark times, I think is one of the most amazing things about my personal life right now, and it's amazing to be able to be elected and given that faith by both Jewish and Palestinian residents in Haifa to do that. So.
Okay, I will talk instead of Sharon. Word of God. So my stories shortly. Growing up in a very small family in Tel Aviv, a family of just my twin identical brother, our mother, who was a single parent, and our grandmother that helped raise us. And growing up in a single parent household in the very expensive, elitist city of Tel Aviv, my brother and I really felt a lot of the social and economic gaps between us and the other kids. I also have a lot of very early memories, memories of being called to, the administration in the school, asking my mom, asking us to tell our mom to remember to pay the fees of the school, or my teacher really calling out my name. the day before the yearly trip, telling me in front of the entire class that if my mom will not bring the check, the payment for the trip tomorrow, I'm not going to get on the bus. And I remember those feelings of having no control and having shame and feeling that I didn't choose it. It's not something that should happen to me if I didn't choose it. Later on, I even understood I'm gay. Another, world of feelings of unfairness, of feeling I didn't choose it. Why do I feel all the kids are marking me or making me feel ashamed for something I have no control over? And then I had two very powerful experiences of control. One was when I went to work to help at home. I'm in my last year of high school, and it was a coffee place. It was a coffee shop, part of a very big chain, owned actually by an American chain here. And when you work as an adolescent in a coffee place, the laws or the workers' rights are basically just a recommendation, right? It's not enforced. And I remember coming to my boss again and again and again in the first paychecks, telling him, listen, I know that if I work on Shabbat, which is the rest day, you need to pay me extra payment for that. And if I worked extra hours, you need to pay me more. That's the law. And he told me, listen, this is how we do things here. If you don't like it, cross the street, go and work in a different cafe. There's many, in Tel Aviv. But I didn't. I organized the workers instead. Thank you. We built the first union of dining workers industry in Israel, which was also the first union of young workers in Israel. It ended, or it continued with me being fired for organizing the workers, but we took them to court, and I was brought back to work by a court's order, which can be not the nicest thing, to come back to a place that just fired you. But then we were too strong, and we were together, all the workers, and we led a strike of 6 weeks. And it was a powerful strike, and we won. The owner of the chain here in the US flew all the way to Israel. He fired the Israeli CEO, sweet revenge, and he signed a collective agreement with us. And I felt in this moment that maybe I do have some control over my life. Maybe I can do something about the realities that I feel that aren't fair, that I feel that I have maybe no control, but I do. I do. And I felt that it has something to do with working with other people in the same reality than me. I didn't know how to call it. I didn't call it, community organizing back then, but that was a gateway to the same thing I'm still doing today, since the age of 17, 18. And then another very powerful part that I felt that gave me control was being part of the social protest, the leadership of the social protest in Israel, which was an amazing moment in the Israeli society. The equivalent, in 2011, the equivalent of the Arab Spring, the equivalent of Occupy Wall Street here, but the Israeli protest was the largest of them all. And one night in Israel, we had 500,000 people in one demonstration in Tel Aviv. Try to put it in American proportions, it will be like 23 million Americans in Times Square. Like crazy. And we had hope. We had hope that we're going to change reality. We had hope that we're going to win. We had hope that, of course, a government will see the people coming out to the streets shouting, the people demand social justice, and they will say, of course. All the people are outside supporting this protest. But we failed. We miserably failed. People went back home. They felt politics is not for them. They felt that the protest could not bring change. They felt that reality is just getting worse and worse and worse, and that the generation of us in Israel started to talking about immigrating out of the country, moving to Berlin. And we were a group of people from this social protest that really insisted on learning the lessons that we can learn. One was that it is not enough to mobilize, even if you have the ability to mobilize 500,000 people. It's more important the question of what happens tomorrow morning after the demonstration. And it needs to be organizing. Not only mobilizing, but organizing. And the second lesson came from this slogan I just said, the people demand social justice. It was the only moment in Israel's history where we chanted and shouted on the streets, both in Arabic and in Hebrew, this slogan, Ha'am doresh tzedek חברתי. The people demand social justice. El shab yurid adala ijtimaiya. And it was the very first moment in Israel's history where we used the word the people, not in the context of the Jewish people, And not in the context of the Palestinian people, but actually in the context of the people. All of us together that demand something that is good for all of us. And those two lessons became the fundaments of standing together, organizing and building people's politics.
Wow, let's end there for now. Thank you.